Bill on 531 VI.
It is 8 minutes past 8 o'clock. It's great to have your company this Thursday. I'm William Terite in the chair with you through until 9 a.m. this morning. Now, Labor MP David Parker announced this week that he'll be retiring from Parliament in May after more than 2 decades of service. First elected in 2002, David has held a wide range of ministerial portfolios from Attorney General to Trade, Environment, Revenue and more, you name it. He's known for a strong advocacy in areas like the environment, civil liberties and economic reform. Parker joins me this morning. Thanks so much for your time.
Pleasure.
Before we get into, obviously, a reflection from yourself on your time in Parliament, there are just a number of things I perhaps want to talk to that are currently in the fore. Social media at the moment, you've made some comments. I mean, let's, for a bit more context, talk me through what you've been talking about in that space.
Well, look, I think the ills of social media are appalling. We've got high youth suicide rates, self-harm, mental health is declining amongst our younger people at an alarming rate. We've got people losing their investments to internet scams. The internet providers do nothing about it. In fact, they sell the fraudsters advertising services and make money from them. We've got lies being pushed, including by international actors using artificial intelligence and bots to push them around. I mean, the ills are just appalling. And it's happening because we have allowed those tech giants to be irresponsible because of a law that says that they're not liable for what's called third-party content. And until we change that, I think we're going to have lies persisting and untruths. And for me, that's very, very risky because we know that democracies really rely upon truth. And the fourth estate having a revenue model that allows us to hold politicians to account when they're lying and for people to get reliable information, whereas demagoguery and dictatorships rely upon propaganda. And that's the route they're heading. So I say that these tech barons, they're megalomaniacal, greedy, they're selfish, they got more money than they'll ever need, they avoid taxes, and they need to be brought under control.
I couldn't agree more with that sentiment. With that in mind, though, you're clearly fired up. Why are you deciding to call time on Parliament?
23 years. As I said to someone the other day, it's like 2 life sentences without parole, and even I'm allowed out of the place eventually. Look, I actually contemplated not standing at the last election. I stayed in partly because I was dissatisfied with what was happening with some of the settings around tax in the country. And I've given that a bit of a push through party processes, and I've also reset our foreign policy in relation to some important issues. And then finally I was overseas a couple of weeks ago, and 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I got back and I was really jet lagged, and I had to get up at 4:30 in the morning to get a cab to the airport at 5 a.m. for an early morning flight. And I just reflected on the fact that 50 years ago in 1975, I had a milk run that I had to get up for at 5 a.m. every morning. And I thought, my goodness, 50 years on, do I really want to be doing this forever?
Yeah, fair point. With that in mind, I mean, it's well publicized, right? At the last election, you relinquished or you let go of your revenue portfolio. I mean, there's debate around why that is. I mean, obviously, you were keen on pursuing, for example, a wealth tax. The party was against it, or the leadership at the time. It kind of begs the question, are you happy with the direction the party's going in? I mean, it's quite noticeable, perhaps from the outside looking in, it's quite centrist.
Well, look, I'm a member of the Labour Party, and at one level, we serve the interests of people who work for a living, including small business owners and the people that own one farm. But we're not there primarily for the interests of capital, like the people that own 50 houses or 10 farms, or the billionaires. They can look after themselves. And so I have a strong view that part of the answer to a fair society is a thriving middle class. If you've got a thriving middle class, they're happy to look after the people in need, and they can afford to. And for you to have a thriving middle class, they've got to be doing the right thing, getting good education and health service and things that rely upon taxes being collected from people. But you won't have that if there's a very small section of the population, cleaning out the rest because they're getting all the rewards from the economy. And that's essentially what's happening in the Western world. Just about all of
Yeah.
the wealth that's been created in recent decades has been captured by the top 1% of people. We've got to the point where the bottom 50% of households have only 6% of the assets. The top 1% have 26% of the assets. And every year that 26% goes up because the rates of return on those large fortunes are higher than the rate of growth in the economy. So it's an
Yeah.
arithmetically proven truth that 26% will go up. And it's not at the cost of the people at the bottom because they're already cleaned out. They've only got 6%. It's effectively increasingly at the cost of the middle class. And I think part of the answer to that lies in the tax system.
Sure. I guess the question I'm asking, though, is perhaps do you fear, though, that the Labour Party is becoming too centrist? I look at the Labour Party over in the UK, it's unrecognisable. I mean, are we running the risk of Labour becoming too stuck in the middle?
Well, there's always that risk. I'm not a radical. I actually think my economic policies are amongst the most rational in Parliament. In fact, I'm a
Mm,
former businessman and entrepreneur. I really understand how economies work.
mm,
Um, Look, the Labor Party has tried on a number of occasions to get across the line substantial tax reform in the last decade and a half, and we've failed. And it hasn't always been for the want of trying. Sometimes it has been for the want of trying. One of the reasons I stayed in is I wanted to push along the debate within the Labor Party, not so much in the public, because I've withdrawn from those public debates a little bit because we need to sort out our own views internally. And we're going through a process of that. And our election offering will be made clear by the time of the election. And I think it will include substantial reform, which will both improve the economy and improve fairness for people in the country.
yeah, look, let's just a bit of reflection perhaps of your time, just very quickly. I know you're a busy man, but in terms of if I look back at Labour in the past 2 decades of your time, the messiest era to me, of course, is the Cunliffe era. I was in high school when that all unfolded, though. I just started high school. With that in mind, though, I was quietly rooting. I thought you'd go all the way as a leader. How do you find the leadership has been under your tenure or your time in
Oh, look,
Parliament?
leaders of all political parties are pretty clever. You might not always agree with them, but they work hard and they're seen by their peers to have something extra compared with the people who aren't the leaders. Now, there's more people probably have the capability to do it than get the opportunity across all parties.
Mm,
But I've worked for some fantastic leaders. Helen Clark and Michael Cullen, absolutely
yeah.
brilliant. Even now, Helen Clark is out there guiding the country on important issues, in my opinion. John Key too. He steps into the media periodically and says, for example, be careful that we don't trash our relationship with China at the moment. Uh, but on my side, Helen Clark and Michael Cullen, I thought Phil Goff would have made a good prime minister. His timing just wasn't quite right. Jacinda Ardern, who could have communicated the way that she did to carry
That's right.
us through COVID? Absolutely brilliant.
Mm.
And as a consequence, we had, one of the lowest death rates in the world. Yeah, it's just a bit like society. Parliament's full of good people because society's full of good people. And one of
Yeah.
my reflections as a member of Parliament is that I leave this place with a better viewpoint of New Zealanders than I arrived with it. Before I was an MP, I was a lawyer, and you're often seeing people in their distressed state after they've done bad things or they're in conflict with somebody else, and you don't see people at their best in those situations. Whereas I see that the vast majority of New Zealanders, they raise their kids well, they make sure they go to school, they contribute to community groups, and they live good lives.
I noticed you skipped Chris Hipkins. Is there a bit of a rift there? I mean, is
No,
water
actually,
under
I
the...
didn't mention anyone current across
Yeah.
any of the political parties. No, no, no. There's no personal rift between Chris and I. We've obviously disagreed on tax issues, but he's a very, very competent leader. I think he's actually getting better as a leader, and he'll take Labor through to the election. And I think he's likely to win it, as the polls are currently showing.
Look, just very quickly before we move on to foreign policy, are you gutted that you didn't quite reach it to leadership status? Like I said, I was quietly rooting all the way back in high school.
Uh, well, shoulda, woulda, coulda. It's sort of, look, I've had a very rewarding and interesting time here, and I've done it to the best of my abilities, and I've done some pretty good things, I think, pricing emissions and across the environment, civil
Mm.
liberties protections, and then a lot in the economic space, including trade and, controlling who I've, stopped foreigners being able to outbid New Zealanders for our land assets, for our housing, because I think that that's a right of citizenship rather than shouldn't be outbid by some wealthy person from overseas, whether it's a beautiful lakeside property or the most modest house in South Auckland, which is nonetheless somebody's dream and all they can afford. So, I've done some really, really big things. In respect of the things that didn't happen, as my partner says, shoulda, woulda, coulda. You don't worry about that. And if you worried about that stuff, you wouldn't have hung around for 23 years like I have.
Yeah, true. Look, foreign policy, just very quickly. We're living in an increasingly volatile world. I mean, jeepers, look at what's happening with the tariffs at the moment and the Trump administration. Extraordinary watching it from all the way over here. I'm more keen to get your perspective on how we navigate foreign policy in the Pacific, right? It's becoming a battleground between China and the United States, frankly. How would you have handled it, say, if you were our foreign affairs minister?
Yeah, well, I think at the highest level, we have to accept that there is a recalibration happening between superpowers. Since the demise of Russia and the Soviet Union, we've only had one superpower in the world, and that's been the US, and they've been dominant everywhere. Now
Mm,
we have a multipolar world where we've got rising other superpowers, including China. And therefore, the world's going through this uncomfortable recalibration as to how do you manage that. Now, superpowers always flex their muscles. Even
mm,
now, the US is doing that in Panama, close to their home, trying to push out Chinese influence from from Panama. So it's not unexpected that superpowers flex their muscles close to home. That doesn't
mm,
mean to say, and that's what China's doing, and it's to be expected. That doesn't mean to say that everything that happens in further away from China in the Pacific is something that we're happy with. Our greatest attribute in the Pacific for New Zealand and all of the countries of the Pacific is that we are demilitarized and we are
yes.
isolated. Now, it has lots of disadvantages, but it has advantages when it comes to protecting your own culture from too much change from a foreign power. So
Yeah.
we've got to hang on to that isolation, if you like, that physical isolation. So we don't want military bases there. And I think New Zealand's role is to try and work with Pacific Islands to make them more successful economically for their own people, so their people are happy and healthy and doing better every year. Um, and uh, so we're proposing in the Labor Party a Pacific Peace Zone, which is sort of an organizational mechanism through which we could talk to with not to, but with Pacific countries and the
Hmm.
superpowers as to how it is that we avoid the militarization of the Pacific. It also requires us to be more generous in assisting the Pacific countries to succeed economically. And we in Australia, now that the US is withdrawing aid, virtually a lot of aid programs in the Pacific, we've got to step up and we've got to help those countries with their health and their education, obviously, but also with services like banking services, good internet services, and I think perhaps almost most importantly of all, maximizing the value of their fisheries by helping the Pacific countries get the labor content so that get some fish processing income as well, rather than those jobs being exported and that income not going back to the Pacific countries.
Mm. Gosh, I could talk foreign policy and tax talk with you for hours. Thank you very much for your time this morning. I know you've got a select committee to go to, I believe. So I appreciate it. And thank you for your service as well. 2 decades, extraordinary, going out
Oh,
on
thanks, William.
good
That's very
terms.
kind.
Cheers.
Cheers.
That is it. David Parker.